Hey, it's Andrew back here at Big Tex Range in Conroe, Texas, BTO Range Training Center. And we're going to continue on with our two early 20th century Colt revolvers here. We have a Colt New Police from 1900, chambered in 32 New Police, and a Colt Police Positive Special from 1920, chambered for 3220. And we're going to take the frames apart to show the difference between the two types of lock work and how the Colt revolver, the swing-out revolver, kind of changed when they invented this, or when they integrated this positive stop in the action. So we've got the two guns cleared. They're both swing-out Colt revolvers. Cylinder swing out to the left. So we're going to pull the grips. I'm going to take both of these apart at the same time. We're going to do our absolute best to make sure the parts don't get mixed up, but you know, what could go wrong? So these, you have to be really cautious with some of this old stuff because you don't know when the last time it was taken apart, if it's ever been taken apart. Wouldn't surprise me if it hasn't been taken apart. And just out of curiosity, it's worth looking to see if these grips are marked to the gun at all, and they don't appear to be. Sometimes you'll find it either penciled or scratched, the serial number on the inside of these old grips. It's not on this old, on the 1920 gun. Let's see about the 1900 gun. Now the two grip frame sizes are different. The grips won't interchange between the two. That came right out on its own. Excellent. Yeah, here we go. 11414, 11414. So we have the grips numbered to the gun. That's always good news. And those grips aren't broken like this set of grips is. Where's it? These? Maybe I'm crazy. Oh yeah, here it is right here. This chip out here. So let's work on this old 1900 gun. So the theory of the gun, at least how the guns basically come apart, is the same. And this continues on through the D-frame guns like the Detective Special, Cobra, Agent, and whatnot. And even when we get into this gun, even to a degree, all the way through the original Trooper and the Python, or at least the original Python. So let's pull the cylinders out first. The cylinders are retained by a screw and this pin here on the right side of the frame. Now these two are connected together, so we can reach in here and start bringing this out. And you see that as we loosen this screw, it lifts this pin out of the way because there's a notch or a flange, I guess, on this screw that engages a groove in that pin. So we can pull this out, and we should be able to lift these two pieces out. Now 120 years of grime and gunk can cause us a problem. So if you take a look very closely, you can see that groove just under the head of that screw, or that flange that engages this groove right here in this pin, and that's what actually indexes into the crane of the Colt to hold the crane in place when it's open. So and there's no spring under there, so now we can open the cylinder and we can remove the cylinder from the front. We'll talk about taking that apart in just a second. So let's do the same thing for the positive gun, the Police Positive Special. So on this gun, what you run into on some of these older screw heads, not just a Colt thing, but the slots themselves will get full of grime. So that's gonna keep your screwdriver blade from bottoming out into the slot. So it's a good idea to take a pick or something, or even a good stiff brush, and clean out those screw slots before you start to try to unscrew them. That way you don't chip out the screw slot itself, because the screw hasn't been able to engage all the way into the screw head. And again, we haven't tried to take these out yet. So we may be fighting a battle against time and crud here. There we go. So it's the same thing. We still have the same little connection between these two parts that we did on the older gun. So they kind of fit together just like that as they're in the frame. So now we can move this cylinder out. The side plates are on the left side of the frame, held in by 2 screws. Now this cylinder latch, this thumb piece here, is engaging a stud here. As you pull this back, as you pull the thumb piece back, it's pulling on the cylinder lock. So when we bring the side plate out, that's going to disengage that stud from this thumb piece. There's a spring behind it, so the thumb piece is going to want to move forward. And there's a small coil spring under there that we want to make sure we don't lose. So we're going to block that like this. We're going to give it a couple of little wraps. That way we can move this off. And there we have exposed this little coil spring. Now on later versions of the Colt Revolvers, like well into the 20th century, this is replaced by an accordion type spring, and there's actually a plastic insert in this slot that makes it a smoother transition when you're pulling the cylinder latch back. It doesn't exist on these older guns. It's a coil spring. So that's a failure point. This little coil spring guy here, easily remade from just coil spring stock. It's not a critical part as far as fitting goes. If you have coil spring stock, then you should be able to make that part. So let's pull this other side plate, and then we can look at the differences side by side. And then they're going to look very similar just from this point, but when we get underneath that hammer, we'll be able to see that there is a significant difference. Yeah, there's crud in these screw slots for sure. So again, there's a little coil, well, it's a different size coil spring, but same idea applies. Coil spring in a hole that lives in this notch here. So here are the two revolvers side by side with the side plates removed, and they look extremely similar. And this is going to look very familiar to anyone that's ever had the side plate off of a Detective Special, Original Trooper, Python, any of those Colt mid-century, mid-20th century lockwork guns. They look very, very similar. So let's continue on. Let's remove the mainspring first. The mainspring is this big V-shaped spring here. This is powering the hammer. It's also powering just about everything else in the gun. It's powering the trigger return. It's powering all of it. Is this V-spring right here. So we can just kind of push this out. Now that click you just heard was a notch opposite this lever right here that's this protuberance right here that's indexed into a hole in the frame. So what can make it easier are parallel jaw pliers to reach in here and compress it, and then pull it out like that. So this part right here is indexing into that hole in the frame right there. And when we go to put these guns back together, if you don't have it in that hole in the frame, then everything, it just won't go back together correctly. The side plate won't fit correctly. It's just a big mess. So if I pull that out a little bit where I can get my parallel pliers on here, compress that, makes life a whole lot easier. It actually makes it a little bit easier on the spring itself. So these springs break. These springs break, whether they're shotgun mainsprings or revolver mainsprings. These are being remade, which is a good thing. Just a lot of the remakes that I've seen do not have these tabs on them, the tab for the frame. And this tab here, they don't have those tabs on them. And while that may make it easier to put the gun back together, it also allows that spring to move around in the gun itself while the action's being worked. So not the better plan. So once that spring is out, we still look relatively the same, except now you can see, you may not be able to see, but there's some additional parts visible down in the bottom here in this gun that you don't see in this gun. So let's continue on with pulling it apart. So now the hammer or the hand can just lift out of either gun. It just lifts out. And now we can move out this lever here. Now this is where I may need a punch. Typically this will just push out, and it does. And this is where 120 years of gunk, or in this case 100 years of gunk, come into play. Got lucky there, folks. They just both push right out like they're supposed to. So we have an additional flange on the older gun here on this particular lever that we don't have on this one. So continuing on now, the hammer will just lift out. Gunk notwithstanding. And the hammer will just lift out here. All right, so here's what I'm talking about. This collection of parts right here, this connector and this block right here, this is what makes this gun a police positive. This is the positive trigger block that Colt incorporated into their guns with the adoption of the police positive and then the police positive special. So in the early 1900s, what this block does is at this point when the trigger is at rest, this block is pulled forward, is pushed up, and is actively blocking the face of the hammer. It's blocking the hammer from going forward and for the firing pin nose or the firing pin to go through the recoil shield and potentially contact the primer. It's being blocked. When the trigger is pulled to the rear, this block is pulled out of the way, so that when the hammer goes forward, that block is cleared and is no longer blocking the firing pin from protruding through the breech face and firing the gun. So a drop safety, if you will, because essentially that's what it is a drop safety that didn't exist on these earlier guns. So we just have the trigger by itself here on this older guy, just lifts right out. And when we lift the trigger out on this one, we're going to get all this other business. Well, we should get all this other business with it, but we didn't. So these are the two parts that compose that lock system, and these are pretty filthy. So there's a stud here on this trigger that keys, and it all keys together. Whoops, come on now. it all keys together basically like this in the gun. So it all articulates together, and it pivots on this boss here for the hammer. So that is the positive. And they continued that lock all the way through until you get to the Mark III and the Mark V, and then the Mark V revolver actions after that. So this is, of course, the dimensions of the parts are different, you know, based on the frame size of the gun. So continuing further through here, this is the bolt or the cylinder lock. It's retained by one screw right here, very small screw, and there's a coil spring that lives underneath that. And then this piece here, this just slides out. There we go. That's the actual piece that locks the cylinder into place, and that's the same on this gun right here. So we also have this bolt here, but if you notice, the geometry is different on this bolt right here. So the guns unlock differently. This gun unlocks more with the interaction with the lever. This gun operates with the interaction of the hammer. See if I can make it do it. Probably not. Okay, well anyway, that's what the stud on the lever does. It actually pulls this up, and the trigger is compressed. This is pulled up, allowing the cylinder latch to clear out of the way of the cylinder. At the same time, the leading structure of the hand, or the leading interface of the cylinder hand, this part here engages the ratchet like so, and begins to push it. Remember, the Colt revolves clockwise. So it pushes it like so, and then the second surface on the hand engages the next ratchet down, and when the gun is in the locked position, well, we would have it, let's see if I can get my finger out of the way. The hand would be locked like this, holding it against the cylinder. The cylinder is locked between this surface of the hand and then that cylinder lock in the bottom of the window. So that's how the gun locks up. So that's why timing one of these older Colt revolvers is more difficult than, say, the Smith & Wesson, because you have to mate both of these two surfaces to that ratchet. The Smith & Wesson is different. There's the leading edge of the hand, and then it times by the width of the cylinder hand itself, or it finishes timed by the width of the cylinder hand itself. So retiming one of these or fitting a new hand to it is a bit problematic. You probably need a person that is fairly up on the older Colt revolver styles to make that work, because it is a bit of a delicate process to do that. Because you have really three surfaces. You have the surface that clears this cylinder latch out of the way. You have that initial part of the hand that engages the ratchet first, and then you have the secondary timing surface of the hand that engages that second ratchet. So as Colt evolved with their double action, the guns that we begin to see in the 70s with the Mark III series, the Trooper 3, the Lawman 3, and even the official Police 3, or the Police Positive 3, I guess I should say, have a completely different lock work. We start to see the introduction of MIM machinery and a lot more coil springs and things of that nature in there. And then the Mark V lock work after that. So those are the differences in these two guns. Putting them back together, as long as you're not replacing parts, is fairly simple. Some of the problem areas that we run into is this is really the only locking surface on these old Colt revolvers, is this interface here, where this part goes through into the into the cylinder window, and it engages this this recess in the back of this ratchet. So this has to be kept clean. And remember, this is powered forward by this spring, this little tiny coil spring that lives here. So we have to make sure that we have good spring tension here. This is nice and clean and works smoothly because there's nothing locking this gun in the front. There's no additional lock up here like there is on the Smith, and there's no latch here like you see on some versions of Smith & Wesson, than other revolvers like Dan Wesson and things of that nature doesn't exist in this Colt. So this is one of the areas where we have to make sure that that we have good good spring tension, and it's good and clean. So these guns really need to be cleaned, and they need just a little bit of oil on every pivoting surface when we put them back together. Is kind of the way these Colts like to run. So to take these cylinders apart, they do not take apart like a Smith & Wesson. It does require a special tool once we get down to it. Just turning this isn't going to do anything, because this rod here is this is just a, and I really should be using I have some polymer jawed parallels, which would probably be a better solution for this. Yeah, it's not going to come. So removing the ratchet, this ratchet unscrews, and there's a special wrench that we use to pull that off. It's typical righty-tighty, but this star itself unscrews. That allows you to remove the cylinder from the crane. And then to remove the spring, the extractor spring requires a crane bushing tool, a special tool to go in. So there's a small castle nut in there that has to be removed. So that's a video for a different day, mainly because we loaned out the tool and haven't gotten it back. Don't loan your tools, guys. It's never a good plan. So anyway, two Colt revolvers, 20 years apart, 1900 and 1920. Significant difference in the lockwork with the evolution of that positive hammer block. And those are a little bit of Colt. We'll do some more stuff on Colt, some more in-depth stuff on some other model Colts as they come in. So if you like what we're doing, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button. Let us know. Hit that notification bell. I keep forgetting about that thing, let you know when we post new videos. And drop us a comment, drop us a note if you'd like us to take a look at something in particular. We'll try to get that done for you. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.